Hi there, my name's Grace Thompson, though most people around here just call me Auntie Grace. I've lived in this little lakeside town most of my life. I used to teach at the local elementary school, 3rd grade mostly, before I retired a few years back. My husband, Dan, was a carpenter, the kind of man who could build anything with his hands and fix just about everything with his patience. We had one son, Max, our pride and joy. Though, well, you'll come to know that life doesn't always turn out the way we dream it will. These days, it's mostly me, the house, and the quiet. Sometimes I think the walls remember more than I do, all the laughter, the arguments, the smell of Sunday pancakes, and Dan's soft humming when he worked in the shed. But today, I want to tell you about something that changed me. Something that hurt deeply but also opened my eyes to the kind of woman I had become, and the kind I needed to be again. It started one calm morning by the lake. The sun was soft, the kind of gold Dan used to love. I made coffee and baked banana bread, Max's favorite since he was a boy. He and his wife, Lena, were coming over. They'd been calling more often lately, asking about my health, the house, my plans. You know that tone, gentle but loaded. When they arrived, Lena looked perfect as always. Max hugged me quickly, distracted. We sat with our coffee, and then, without warning, he said, "Mom, we sold the house." Just like that. 3 words that turned my whole world upside down. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at my son. The words "we sold it" kept echoing in my head like the ticking of that old wall clock. I tried to smile, thinking maybe I'd misheard. But no one laughed. Lena looked down at her nails, and Max avoided my eyes completely. "I thought you'd be relieved, Mom," he said softly. "You won't have to worry about upkeep anymore. You'll move somewhere easier." Somewhere easier. That house wasn't a chore, it was my life. Dan built every shelf, every step on that porch. My hands planted every flower out front. I wanted to shout, but instead, I heard my own voice trembling. "When were you planning to tell me?" He sighed. "The papers are already signed." "Mom." The offer was too good to miss. Lena added, "It's for the best, Grace. You'll thank us later." Thank them. For erasing 40 years of memories with a single signature, the room felt small. The air thick. I could see the lake through the window, calm and beautiful, pretending nothing had changed. Inside, though, everything had. I felt a strange stillness, like the world had stopped moving just for me to feel the ache. After they left, I stayed seated for hours. The banana bread had gone cold. The coffee was bitter. My hands were shaking, and yet I didn't cry. Not that day. Maybe I was too stunned, or maybe I'd already cried too many times for people who didn't notice. That night, I walked through every room, touching the walls, the photos, the old armchair where Dan used to nap. I whispered a quiet goodbye, though no one heard me but the house itself, and as I stood at the window one last time, watching the moon reflect on the lake, I thought, how did love turn into this? I barely slept that night. I just lay there listening to the old house breathe, the creaks, the sighs, the way the wind brushed against the windows like it was saying goodbye too. Around midnight, I got up and made myself tea. Dan used to say, "Nothing good ever happens after midnight, Grace. Go back to bed." But that night, even his voice couldn't calm me. I kept thinking about all the years I'd spent building this home, the way we dreamed of growing old here together. I thought about Max, my sweet boy who used to run down that hallway with scraped knees, yelling, "Mom, look what I found." That same hallway now felt like a stranger's. By morning, my decision was made. If they'd already sold my house, then I would leave on my own terms. I wasn't going to wait for someone else to tell me what was best for me. When Max called the next day, I didn't answer. He left a message, something about understanding and new beginnings. I deleted it. For once, I didn't rush to smooth things over. I just sat on the porch with my tea, watching the lake sparkle under the morning sun. It was beautiful, painfully beautiful, knowing soon it wouldn't be mine to look at anymore. I spent the next week packing slowly. Every photograph, every dish, every book carried a story. I whispered a little thank you to each one before tucking it away. When I found Dan's old flannel shirt hanging behind the door, I pressed it to my face and cried quietly. It still smelled like sawdust and home. Neighbors came by, curious about the for sale sign. I just smiled politely and said, "Oh, it's time for a change." They nodded, not knowing that change wasn't my choice. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake turned gold, I whispered to Dan, "Looks like it's just me now, old friend." And for the first time in years, I felt something shift, not just sadness, but a small spark of strength I'd forgotten I had. The morning I left the lake house, the sky was the softest shade of gray, the kind that makes everything feel quiet and gentle. I loaded the last box into the car and stood by the porch for a long time. The house seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to say something. So I did. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything." The drive to the new apartment was long and silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just let the road hum beneath me, carrying away pieces of my old life 1 mile at a time. When I arrived, the building was modern, shiny, too perfect. The kind of place that smelled like new paint and loneliness. Max met me there, all smiles, holding flowers like it was supposed to make everything better. "Mom, you'll love it here," he said. I smiled back, but my heart stayed at the lake. I watched him unpack things, rearranging my life into neat little shelves. He was trying so hard. And for that, I couldn't be angry anymore. When he left that evening, the apartment grew so still I could hear my own heartbeat. I sat on the couch, surrounded by boxes, and thought, maybe this was what starting over really looked like. Empty walls. New air. A chance to meet myself again. The next morning, I walked to the small park nearby. The air smelled of wet grass and coffee from the cafe on the corner. I sat on a bench and watched people rushing by, young mothers with strollers, old couples sharing laughs. Kids chasing pigeons. For the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. An elderly man sat beside me, reading a newspaper. He looked up, nodded politely, and said, "First time here?" I nodded back. "You'll get used to it," he said, "it grows on you." Maybe he was right. Maybe, just maybe, life still had something left for Auntie Grace, something beyond old houses and lost time. That night, I brewed tea in my new kitchen. It didn't taste quite the same, but as I raised the cup to my lips, I whispered to myself, "You did it, Grace. You're still standing." A week passed in that new apartment before I finally unpacked the last box. Every picture frame, every little trinket had a story, and touching each one felt like revisiting another life. I placed Daniel's photo by the bedside table, just like before. His kind smile seemed to say, "You're doing fine, Grace." That morning, I decided to take a walk again. The park had become my small escape. I stopped by that same bench, and there was the old man again, the one with the newspaper. "Back already?" He chuckled. I smiled. "I guess this place really is growing on me." He introduced himself as Mr. Howard, a retired schoolteacher. He had kind eyes and the sort of calmness that makes you feel safe. We started talking, about books, about tea, about how time slips by quietly when you're not looking. Each morning after that, we'd find ourselves at that same bench. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence. Other times, we'd share stories, his about the classroom, mine about my children. I found myself laughing again, not the polite kind of laughter you use to hide sadness, but the real one that shakes your shoulders. Max called one evening. "Mom, how are you holding up?" he asked, sounding worried. "I'm doing all right," I said softly. "I even made a friend." He laughed in surprise. "That's great, Mom. See? I told you it'd be a fresh start." I didn't tell him that some nights I still cried a little, not out of regret, but out of nostalgia. I didn't want to worry him. One Sunday, I invited Mr. Howard for tea. As he looked around my cozy living room, he said, "You've made it feel like home already." "Home," I repeated quietly. It didn't sting this time. It felt right. When he left, I realized something. Maybe life doesn't take things away to punish us. Maybe it just clears the space for something new to grow. And sitting there with an empty teacup and a full heart, I knew Auntie Grace's story wasn't ending. It was just turning a page. A few days after that quiet Sunday, I woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight spilled through the curtains, warm and golden, and for the first time in months, I felt an urge to do something. Not just to fill the day, but to live it. I brewed my tea, opened my old notebook, and began to write. Just small things at first, a recipe Daniel loved, a funny thing Max once said when he was 5, the smell of the lilac tree that used to grow outside our window. But as I wrote, I realized these weren't just memories. They were stories. Stories that shaped me, healed me, and carried me through every season of life. That week, I visited the community library. A flyer on the notice board caught my eye: local storytelling evening, share your tales. Inspire others. I smiled. Maybe this was a sign. When I told Mr. Howard, he beamed. "Grace, you've always had a gift for words. People need to hear them." "Oh, I don't know," I said shyly. "It's been years since I've spoken in front of anyone." He laughed. "Then it's about time you start again." So that Friday evening, I walked into the library's small hall, hands trembling slightly, heart pounding. There were maybe a dozen people, sipping tea, chatting softly. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and began, "My name is Grace. And I want to tell you about the day my son sold my house." At first, my voice quivered. But as I spoke, faces softened, smiles appeared, a few eyes glistened. When I finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then filled with warm applause, a young woman came up to me afterward. "That story," she said, "it felt like my own mom talking." That night, I walked home under the streetlights, feeling lighter than I had in years. I realized I hadn't lost my home, I had simply found a new audience, a new way to share pieces of it with the world, and maybe that's what healing really is, telling your story until it stops hurting. That night, after all the tears had dried on my pillow, I sat in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, staring at the ceiling. The house felt different, lighter somehow. There were no calls to expect, no footsteps rushing in asking for favors, no tense silences waiting to be filled with excuses. Just me. And the quiet hum of peace I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I brewed my coffee and stood by the window watching the sun rise. For the first time in a long while, I felt the morning light on my face without a single worry about who needed money or who would call next. I thought of my late husband, Richard. He used to tell me, "Grace, people who truly love you never make you feel used." I had forgotten that. I had confused giving with being valued, and love with dependency. Later that day, I took out a box of old photographs. There was Max, just 5 years old, his cheeks round and eyes full of mischief. He was hugging a stray kitten he'd found in our backyard, insisting we keep it. I smiled through tears. Where had that sweet boy gone? Somewhere along the way, life and greed had replaced gratitude and affection, but as painful as it was, I realized something important. I couldn't change them, but I could change myself. I could learn to protect my heart, the same way I had protected everyone else for years. I went to the small desk by the window and started writing. Not letters of complaint or regret, but simple notes about my memories, my lessons, my reflections. It was almost like talking to Richard again, like putting the pieces of my heart back where they belonged. By afternoon, I decided to do something bold. I opened my phone, blocked Max and Lena's numbers, and saved their last messages in a folder titled Closure. It wasn't anger that led me to do it, it was peace. Because peace, my dear, is not something that finds you. It's something you finally choose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered softly to myself, Auntie Grace, you've done enough for others. It's time to live for you. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without waiting for anyone's call. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me feel lonely. But not today. Today, it felt peaceful, almost like a soft hug from life itself. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the golden sunlight spill across the kitchen floor. It reminded me of how simple beauty could be when you finally stop chasing what doesn't want to stay. After breakfast, I took out an old notebook from my drawer, the one I used to write in when Richard was alive. Between those yellowed pages were recipes, family moments, and little notes he used to leave for me. Reading his words again, I smiled. Grace, he had written once, you'll never run out of love, but please remember, you deserve to keep some for yourself too. I think that was the day my heart started to heal. I decided to step outside that afternoon. It had been months since I went to the community park. The trees were shedding their last autumn leaves, and a group of children were chasing each other around the swings. I sat on a bench and simply watched life moving forward, and realized I wanted to move forward too. That's when Mrs. Nelson, my old neighbor, saw me and came over. Grace. I haven't seen you in ages. You look peaceful, she said, surprised. I laughed softly. Maybe I finally learned how to be, I replied. We talked for a long while. Before leaving, she told me about a small reading group at the library, mostly retired women who shared stories from their lives. Something inside me lit up. Maybe that's what I needed, to tell my stories, not to seek sympathy, but to share the lessons, the laughter, the tears. That evening, I opened my notebook again and began writing, not just about the pain, but about the hope that followed it. My story wasn't over, it was only changing chapters. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next. A week later, I finally gathered the courage to visit the library. I wore my favorite blue cardigan, brushed my hair neatly, and tucked my little notebook in my purse. The librarian greeted me with a warm smile and guided me to the back room where the reading group met every Thursday. There were about 10 women there, all around my age. Some had silver hair, some wore bright scarves, and every single one of them had that same soft tiredness in their eyes, the kind that comes from living, losing, and still loving. They welcomed me like an old friend. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled a little as I opened my notebook. I wasn't sure where to start, but somehow the words just came out. I told them about Max and Lena, about how I had confused love with giving, and how it took heartbreak to remember who I was. The room grew silent, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that means every heart in that space is listening. When I finished, there were tears in a few eyes, and then gentle applause. Mrs. Nelson reached over and squeezed my hand. Grace, she said softly, you have a gift. Your pain turns into poetry when you speak. That night, I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. My voice, the one I had buried under years of silence and sacrifice, had finally come back to me. Later, as I sat in my cozy living room with a cup of tea, I thought to myself, maybe that's what I was meant to do: tell my story so no other woman feels invisible again. A few days after that reading group, I couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Nelson had said: your pain turns into poetry when you speak. Those words echoed in my heart like a gentle calling. That night, I sat at my little writing desk with a cup of chamomile tea and my old notebook in front of me. The idea of sharing my stories with strangers felt strange, but also thrilling. I remembered how lost I had felt all those years, giving, forgiving, waiting. And then I thought, maybe there are other women like me out there, sitting in quiet houses, wondering if they still matter. Maybe if they heard my story, they'd know they're not alone. So I opened my laptop, the one Max had gifted me a few years ago, and searched how to record a story. I watched a few tutorials, adjusted my microphone, and began to speak softly into the quiet night. Hello everyone, I said, my voice trembling. My name is Grace. Auntie Grace. I'm a retired teacher, a wife, a mother, and like many of you, I've learned some lessons the hard way. At first, I stumbled over my words, nervous and unsure. But as I went on, my voice grew steadier, warmer. The story flowed out of me, not just as memory but as healing. When I finished, I sat there for a long time, tears running down my cheeks. It felt as if Richard was right there, smiling and saying, "You did it, Grace. You found your purpose again." The next morning, I uploaded that first story. I didn't expect anyone to listen. But within hours, the comments began to appear, kind words from strangers who said my story felt like their own. And just like that, Auntie Grace Diaries was born. Not from fame or ambition, but from a quiet heart finally brave enough to speak. It had been almost 2 weeks since I uploaded my first story. I didn't expect much, maybe a few kind souls who'd listen before moving on. But to my surprise, thousands of people watched it. The comments section overflowed with messages from women, men, even young adults, saying things like, "Auntie Grace, your story healed a part of me," or "You sound just like my mom." I couldn't believe how something born from pain could touch so many hearts. Every morning, I'd sit with my coffee and read those comments, smiling quietly. For the first time in years, my heart felt full, not from giving money or gifts, but from giving something that truly mattered, a piece of my truth. Then, one evening, as I was washing the dishes, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. But when I heard the voice on the other end, my hands froze. "Mom?" It was Max. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. He sounded different, softer, unsure, almost like that little boy who used to run into my arms after scraping his knee. "Mom, I saw your story," he said quietly. "Someone sent it to me. I didn't know how much I hurt you." My throat tightened. There were so many things I wanted to say, years of silence between us. But I just listened. He spoke about regret, about how things got out of hand, about Lena realizing too late what they'd done. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I whispered, "Max, sometimes life teaches us lessons we refuse to hear until it's too late. But I'm glad you're listening now. We didn't fix everything that night. But for the first time, the call wasn't about money or help, it was about understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something new." The night after Max's call, I couldn't sleep. His voice kept echoing in my head, that mix of guilt, love, and confusion only a child can carry. Part of me wanted to run to him like before, to fix everything. But another part, the wiser part, whispered, "Grace, not this time." So instead of calling back, I prayed. I prayed for his peace, for Lena's maturity, and for my own heart to stay steady. I realized that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means setting your heart free from the weight of resentment. Days passed, and Max sent a few messages, gentle ones this time, respectful. "I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you, Mom," he wrote after watching my second story. That single line made me smile in a way I hadn't in years. I didn't lose my son completely, I just needed to let go so he could find his own way back. My days fell into a new rhythm. Morning walks, tea by the window, afternoons spent writing news stories for the people who called me Auntie Grace. I realized my home wasn't empty anymore, it was filled with the voices of those who found comfort in my words. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in soft pink and gold, I sat on the porch and thought about my life. I had been a wife, a mother, a provider, and now a storyteller. A woman who turned her heartbreak into healing. I smiled and whispered to myself, "You did it, Grace. You chose peace." And maybe that's all life really asks of us, not to have everything perfect, but to find beauty even in what's broken. Because love, real love, begins when you start giving it to yourself.